Hello and welcome to my basic tutorial on building your first level in Cryengine 3. We're going to make something similar to this, but this is the first step. And then we're going to paint it with different layers of textures. We're going to put some vegetation, a custom time of day from a file, as well as go over the basics of setting up your own time of day. And we're going to do a few other things and learn about a few entities. So let's just go over here to File, click New. Let's name our level whatever we want to name it. I'm going to name this a bunch of letters. And while you wait, your level will be generated, and it'll be plain water, like so. What we're going to do now is generate a surface texture, and we are going to make it flat. So edit terrain, under terrain, then click generate terrain, click OK. Your terrain should be generated. Once it's generated, what we're going to do is we're going to flatten out all these areas, and as you can see, it's the opposite of flat. So that's why we're going to change it. So over here, inside of our terrain editor dialog box, sorry, not dialog box, but let's go to rise and lower terrain. Set your outside and your inside radius to 99, or just as far as it goes, hardness to 1, and set your height to 50. So you can either adjust it manually here, or you can adjust it manually actually inside the editor by just directly clicking on the terrain. I want to try to get all the edges and make it a nice flat level. We're going to leave a little tiny bit of a cave in the middle. We'll do that in a little bit. But for now, let's just go over getting the main parts of the level done. So we're just going to get all the outsides first. We're going to have one mountain and one chasm. We're going to talk about painting terrain by altitudes and slope. It makes for a much more realistic level, and it makes life a lot easier. So we've got the outside done. Let's just paint a little bridge in across here. As you can see, my brush hardness is really thick. So we're going to take this and lower it. Let's go to there. Okay, let's define this. Let's take that hardness up a little bit. We can have a mountain right there in the middle. Okay. Up here in terrain, you can see how, here, let me move this. You can see how blocky this is, and obviously this is not something that's ever going to be desirable for your custom level, ever. I mean, it just looks awful, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to remedy that by going up here to terrain and refine terrain texture tiles. Click yes. Successfully refined. Save as required. Click save. And now, if we go over and we open the smoothing tool, we can begin to smooth that out. Now when you're making terrain, you don't just have to use the in-editor stuff. You can use things such as Mudbox, ZBrush, I'm assuming. You could make a height map from a normal map using Ndo2. You could hand paint the height map just using black and white and gray. So, I mean, there's a lot you can do. You just have to see what works for you, what gets the best results. Mess around. There's things like geo-control and world machine. Obviously this isn't realistic, but that's not the point. So you can see here we want to put a mountain right in the middle, so let's take our raise and lower. We'll turn this radius down to about, we'll keep that radius at about 140. Let's make the height about 75. No, let's do 100. And let's just paint it right here. Actually, let's turn down that hardness. Let's turn up the the height. So one thing I didn't realize that I did is I actually made this level way too high. We want to go over here to set max height and set it to 2048. Mine was set to a much lower value of 1024, which is the default value, it's already really high. But we can begin painting our little mountain right here in the middle. Make it look however you want it. It doesn't really have to look any good or be realistic. Smooth it out if you feel like it. um, so now what we want to do is we want to add some water into these holes right here. So what we're going to do is there's a few ways to do it, but we're going to do it this way. We're going to go to, under the terrain editor, go to set water level. We're going to set it to 850. You'll now see that the water has filled up these little holes right here. That's good enough for this tutorial. Actually, you know what? Let's make it 950. It'll look a little bit better. And you can see it almost goes to the top. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start painting this level. Now that we've got our height map all set, if you felt like it and you wanted to use this in a different level, you can just click export, save it out wherever you want, and then press import and use it later. Just take a look at all those tools, mess around. There's a lot of ways to make really good levels. So let's take a look at how we can quickly paint our terrain. So let's go to our material editor. Just open that up, put it right here. I definitely recommend having multiple monitors. It makes life easier. And under terrain, go to texture. And what we're going to do is we're going to rename this to layer by double clicking it. We're going to call this grass. We're not going for realism here, just understanding the tools. And then we're going to change this layer texture right here. Change this to, let's see what would be a good one. You want to try to avoid using high resolution images. 512 or lower is probably a good idea. The more detailed they are, oftentimes the more busy it will look, and it will just look odd. For example, if I painted this, the distance detail would make it look like very close up grass. Whereas if I use this mud texture, which doesn't appear to have much detail, I don't know because I can't see it yet, and I'm going to paint it and see how it looks. So now inside of your material editor, go to materials, terrain, and then with this selected, click on grass 5, assign material over here with this layer. So now it's set to grass 5. So let's move these out of the way. Actually, you know what you can do that I prefer to do is just when you have this, you're clicking and dragging your terrain editor, you can click and drag it into this, so that way you now have tabs for everything. You can add a new one like your flow graph module, and then I keep them all on a separate monitor. It just makes my life easier. So I'm going to be using that from now on. If that's confusing, just remember that I have everything here. Okay, so now that we have our first layer, let's set the parameters for that under the roll-up bar and then terrain. Go to layer painter. Let's increase our radius to about 150. Make sure your settings are identical to mine. Hardness at 1, they should be, it's default. So it's grass layer selected. We want our slope to be 0 to 45 degrees. So basically, if it's higher than 45 degrees, it will not paint it. And then the altitude, let's set it to Well, we're going to set to 2048 because I guess it doesn't want to. So we're going to have an issue here where we're not actually going to be able to paint this, which is kind of sad, but we'll deal with it as time goes on. But you can see now I'm painting it out. Now let's deal with that issue. Let's address this issue very quickly, and we'll address why that looks brown. You can see the detail up close. Let's address this height map issue. So what we're going to do is I actually flattened my terrain. That's kind of irrelevant at this point, so it doesn't really matter what your level looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually remake that terrain because we came across an issue, and using the raise and lower to set your height is the wrong tool, and I should have told you to use the flatten one. So it doesn't matter what your level looks like right now, we're going to fix it. So take your height, put it at, before we do that, actually let's set the water level to 120. And then your water will be very far down there, and your terrain will be very far up here. Not for long. So let's set our height at 140, and then set our outside radius. Whoops, we still have our layer painter selected. Now in here, with flatten selected, or modify, you can now see that we are making this go all the way down to the height of 140, thus removing any issues we were having previously. And then we're going to manually add in everything we had before. It's also good to make sure your inside radius is at maximum as well, and your hardness, because then you just can paint it like that instead of having to waste time trying to make it a certain way. Okay, now that we have that painted, we're going to go and do that thing we were doing before with removing it. So we're going to set our height to 110, and we are going to reduce our radius and have our inside radius be a little bit lower for a nice transition. Turn our hardness down to 0.23 or 2. Let's add back in some nice little you can see we're getting a result similar to what we had before. It's a little bit less extreme, so let's set that height down to 80. Make it a little bit deeper because it's not a very deep pond. Okay, there we go. And all that's left to do, once you get it how you like it, is to use the raise. So the thing about raise is you actually set the height that you want it to go up at every time, as opposed to being a predetermined height. Actually, I just figured this out. So this tool right here, when you have the modify panel open, will actually take importance over everything in here. So what we're going to want to do is set our height to probably about 180. Start bringing that up, and then scale it down as you build your mountain up. You can see it looks pretty blocky and terrible. It just depends on how you make it, but what we're going to do is smooth it, so it doesn't really matter how it looks right now anyway. Let's go to smooth, hardness. I'm just going to smooth that so it looks a little bit more natural. Now we can begin finally painting our layers. after we just finish smoothing this out, so that way we don't have any super blocky edges. Okay. That'll do. If you want, you can try to remove those using the raise and lower tools or the flatten tools and then smoothing it. But we're going to just get to our layer painter because that's a little bit more important. So as I was saying before, we have grass and our slope degrees. So this means if the slope is 45 degrees or more, we're going to set to 35 in this case, it won't paint on it. And we're going to make that rock, which looks a lot nicer. So we're going to first, though, over here, before we actually paint it, is go to color and make it a dark green or just a medium green. Turn down the brightness a little bit and hit apply, and this will save it. If you don't hit apply, it won't save that color next time you open this dialog. So you can see what I was talking about with the detail layer when you use your terrain texture layers right here. This is what this layer is right here, and all that texture is determined by this. The actual detail layer, when you get close, is determined by this assigned material, or right here. So that's something to keep in mind. The less repetitive and the least small detail looking it is, I guess, the better it'll look at, the less odd it'll look like at a distance. Or this looks kind of strange. So we're just going to actually have 3 layers. We're going to make a dirt layer. And the whole point of this tutorial, again, is not to make it look totally accurate. It's just to kind of teach you some of the tools. So that way you can expand upon them and take some time and make something. We're going to have a dirt layer. We're going to have a rock layer and a grass layer. If you want to make it a little bit faster, you can turn up the speed, but just know the higher the radius, the longer it takes to paint it, or the harder on your system it is to paint. So next we're going to add some dirt. So let's go back over here, add layer, call this dirts, because making it plural makes it much better. So we're going to, again, change texture layer, find the least generic one you want, or you can find this looks somewhat okay. Go to your material editor. Mine again is in these tabs. I'm going to go and select, let's see, we could just use the mud one. It'll work for now. You can change the colors of them. So with this selected and that material in the material editor, assign material. Now we're going to go to dirts, and we're going to make it from 36 to 45, and the rest will be rock. So now you can see how it got filled in by all this mud, or this dirt texture. It looks a little bit awkward, but again, it's just trying to teach you how to use the tools. Actually, it looks super awkward, but that's okay. We didn't actually change the color, so let's make this a little bit brown. Turn the brightness down just a little bit. Hit apply, and you can see it's a little bit extreme, but it's okay for now. After all of this, we have to generate a surface texture, and it should make everything look slightly better. Now for our final layer, which is rocks. Again, add new layer, rocks. Change texture layer. We're going to do cliff gray, or cliff is 4, and then go to material editor, under terrain, cliff gray 3D, select that, assign material. Now we're ready for our next one, which is going to be from 45 to 90 degrees, and we will finish up painting our layers. You can see it looks a lot nicer. I mean, obviously this is a highly unrealistic terrain, but just finish up painting anything else that wasn't getting painted in by the dirt. And then after this, we're going to generate our surface texture. which is important because if you don't generate a surface texture after you've painted, you will lose that data. At least in my experience, that's the case. I don't remember it being like that in Cryengine 2, but it definitely is in Cryengine 3. I may be mistaken because it's been quite a few years since I've actually used Cryengine 2. Okay, now that we have this poorly painted terrain, we're going to go up here to File, Generate Surface Texture, and we're going to use the highest quality. This calculate terrain sky accessibility. A lot of people wonder what that is. The truth of that is that basically it's an ambient occlusion map. An ambient occlusion map basically will calculate, you know, let me see if I can find one. The ambient occlusion map basically is like self-shadowing, I guess would be a way to explain it. Let's say we were to generate one out of this texture. You know, there would be shadows here, here, and it can add to detail and realism of the terrain, but it just takes quite a while. So we're gonna skip that. I'm probably gonna pause the video because this might take a few minutes. So we click OK. It actually isn't gonna take a few minutes. It really depends on your system. If you're calculating terrain sky accessibility, it can take quite a while. But now you can see that after we've generated it, it still looks a little bit odd, but you know, whatever. It's a tutorial. Okay, so now that we have our world somewhat painted, and if you just don't like how it turned out, feel free to change it up a little bit. Just know that if you change it up, you're going to have to generate that surface texture again. Okay, so now let's get into adding some vegetation to our level. So under vegetation, we're going to click it under the roll-up bar, terrain, vegetation, up here to add vegetation objects, and we're going to go to natural, trees, jungle tree large, nope, we're going to do palm tree. Click and drag and select all of those, click open. Now we have our trees, and yeah, we can go ahead and paint them right now, but I'm going to show you why we shouldn't yet. So let's just select one. You can see that we only added a few, but there's 3 in this small radius. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's say you want to do a bigger radius. That's just a little bit ridiculous. So press Ctrl Z, and then undoes that, and Ctrl Z. And one other thing you'll notice is that they're all aligned equally. That's not good. It adds this appearance of tiling, and it makes the world less believable. It's especially noticeable on flat ground. You can see that. So try to avoid that by click your main category, which is default. You can also add extra ones right here. So you could say palm trees. And then you would add your layers like this. So we're just going to delete this and leave it as palm trees. If you do or not, or if you do or don't, doesn't matter. It just keeps things cleaner. So we're going to do size variation. We're going to make our size 1.2 and our size variation 0.8. So now none of them are all the same height. They're also very large, but that's okay. So nothing is the same height, and it allows it to have a little bit more realism and get in the way less. It takes a while to undo often. There are a few things that I've seen people do in projects that are wrong, or at least make things awkward depending on the type of object. So let's say I place this, and I have a line to terrain on. Here's a better example. A line to terrain. Oh, sorry, it's off. So when you turn this on, your trees will kind of just stick outwards from the terrain, and it looks awkward. So make sure you don't have a line to terrain on unless you feel like placing small bushes or something. You know, that can make it look a little bit better. It just depends. And just avoid doing it with trees. It looks ridiculous. So what we're gonna do is we're going to click palm trees. With our size variation set, we're going to click random rotation. That way they don't all have the same face. They're not all facing the same direction, which looks awkward. We're going to turn on bending. Let's turn it up to 50, which will allow it to bend in the wind. Density, I like to set mine to 0.1. That way you won't have a super high density of trees. Of course, never place trees with them all selected. Cast shadows, receive shadows, and then we're ready to place some trees. So we could place them like this in large groups. But then once we start blanketing the canvas, you can see our poly count goes up extremely high. And it just gets a little bit out of hand. My frame rates start dropping. I mean, it's kind of a stupid choice to go and blanket an entire world. And I have a pretty powerful computer. So it just, even if you're trying to go for a jungle canopy look, definitely, let's say you were trying to make a large level, a large scale level, 10 times this, and you wanted it all to have trees. Well, it'd probably be prudent to make a bunch of really, really low detail trees, maybe, 10 polys per tree, kind of like they did in the forest level for the Cryengine, for the free SDK. If you go outside of the boundaries of the level, you can see some of their trees, and they may not be 4 polys, but they're very, very low, and it will give you detail at great distances, but it also won't negatively affect your frame rate that greatly. So now we've added 3,000 vegetation objects, and our frame rate has dropped over 120 frames per second. So we're just gonna undo all of these. And we're just gonna add a few sporadic trees. So let's turn our brush down to 1. And then we can just add some trees like this. Generally, you wouldn't be playing on a level this big. I mean, if it was a commercial game, they would they'd often avoid this or have it greatly optimized, kind of like in Just Cause 2 and Just Cause 1. Those are definitely designed for that. These trees are not. These are, back in the days of Crisis 1, these were high quality trees. They still are, but they could also be better. So, you can switch through the different trees you want to place and add some variation. You can add bushes from the vegetation selections that there are. Our frame rate is still going up, but it definitely populates the world. If you were to actually go and do this by hand, it would look a lot better, and if you were to actually take some time on it. But it's generally not something you would just willy-nilly place and throw everything everywhere like this. Just kind of populate it how you feel looks right. We're going to add some roads and possibly a river. It just depends on how much time we have and how far over the limit we go. I'm trying to keep this underneath an hour, so we'll see. Okay, now that we have this done, I'd like to talk about one other thing that has always been an irritant to me when I was first learning. Is, let's say I place a bunch of trees and I want to get rid of them. I mean, they're annoying. They're trees. Let's say I placed all these trees and I want to put a base here, which we actually will. We'll probably put it up here, but we still need to make a road and a path that goes all the way down. And there's trees in the way. And yeah, we could have, let's say we're auto-generating terrain. If you watch the road tutorial, there's ways to avoid it, the vegetation from crossing the path, but in this case, it's hand placed. That won't work. So what we're going to do is you go over here to the roll-up bar under terrain, click vegetation, and with the pointer selected, you can now select terrain or vegetation objects. Just simply press delete. So let's just make a path for this road. It's going to be a very steep road, but it's okay. And that works good. So it's going to go down, kind of wind, go around the mountain, end up over there. So let's make our road very quick. As you can see, also I'd like to point out that it tells you how many instances of each vegetation object is placed in your scene. You can see here that our poly count, because of how we distributed it, is only about 100,000 more than the default editor without anything, any terrain, just water. So that's good. Our frame rate is okay. So we're going to go to Mix under Objects in the roll-up bar, Road, and with this Follow Terrain and Snap to Objects on, we're going to go over here because our base is going to be up here. Click here and just keep dragging it along the terrain. Just single left clicking. Just kind of make it go where you want. And then double click to end that. And when you double click, you'll have created your road. There's a lot of options and things that we can do, but we're not going to go over those because we did that in a different tutorial. Go to your material editor, click it up here, or if you have it tabbed, and go to roads. You've got quite a few roads you can select. Actually, that's the wrong one. That's under terrain, sorry. We go to under materials, go to roads, forest, trail, mud. Right click apply, and you have your road. I'd like to also point out, let's say you want to look at your level and you don't want anything like these getting in the way, these little helpers. Shift space will hide everything, and then shift space again will make them appear again. And I always find that helpful and I use it quite often. Now let's thicken up this road a little bit, so select your road. Let's make the width 6. That looks nice. Maybe there'll be tanks or something going down it. Who knows? Let's quickly go over just using the solid tool to make the base. We're going to quickly level out this terrain, so go to Modify, Flatten. We're going to want to pick our height, find out how high this is, and we can see that it's 268. Select that, Control C, bring that over to Flatten, and it's already there. So now set your radius. I'm going to try to have an inside radius that's a little bit smaller. That way it looks a little bit more natural when you flatten it. And it's not super harsh like this, because now we have these harsh corners. So just set that radius kind of low. That looks a lot nicer that way. And if you want, you could paint this like dirt, add some sandbags. Our base isn't going to be that elaborate. It's going to be a fairly simple structure with a solid tool and a few things on top of it. So we're going to use the solid tool over here in the roll-up bar. Click it. And sometimes it doesn't like to work right away. We can, let's use a cylinder. And we can select what size we want it. And it wanted to be a 4-sided cylinder, which doesn't make any sense. So let's delete that. And let's do a box for this tutorial. You set your sides here for your cylinder. Let's do a box. Having your grid on is also very helpful. It allows you to snap objects to it. So now that we've made this and we have our grid on up here, let's make our grid 0.25, and we have our rotation grid on as well. So now with our grid made, let's exit the solid tool by double right clicking. Press 2 on your keyboard to rotate it, 1 to move it. And we have the platform for our base. Let's actually move it down a little bit as it's breaking out of the ground. That looks good. So let's bring our material editor. This isn't going to look amazing, but that's not the point. And we're going to go into materials. Let's see. Sorry, I've been having some weird issues with things not appearing in my material editor. I'm using a different version than I normally use, and it's a little bit weird right now. So under materials, go to concrete, and we're going to apply, with this selected, we're going to apply a concrete wall. So right click, assign to selection. Just find one that you like. I'm personally going to use this one, and I'm going to duplicate it actually so I can make my own version. So right click this concrete wall of 3, duplicate, concrete wall 4, assign a selection. And then let's change the colors of it a little bit. So let's make the diffuse a little bit less saturated. I'm going to turn down this specular. Actually, not here. We're going to go down. Make this a lot darker. It's very dark. Make it a little bit out of a blue tint to it. Let's we're going to adjust our specular and our glossiness. Let's make the specular a little bit. Looks good to me. So now we got that how I wanted it. Now that we're going to be working in a smaller area, let's turn our speed down to, let's turn to 0.5 so we're not just flying all over the place with no direction. Under the geometric entities button in the objects thing in the roll-up bar, we're going to go to objects, props, storage, not storage, structures, and buildings. And we're going to add a guardhouse. So make sure you have this little guy, the follow terrain and snap to objects selected. It's always helpful. We want our guardhouse to be overlooking the trail. Let's just rotate this. Using this grid will allow us to align objects well, and it's very helpful if you want to use modular set pieces. Let's add a few little things. Just look around and see what you like. We're going to add this electric building right here. It's more of a dilapidated, rundown place more than anything. Then we'll add a worker barrack. We'll add a few of these. So rotate that until it's flush with this floor tiling. That way it can be easily moved. Make sure it's puncturing the ground. It looks like it's actually on the ground. Let's rotate this so when the workers get out, they can see that beautiful vista, and they just can't get enough. One thing I like to talk about, if you're familiar with 3ds Max, this won't be a big deal for you, but this view, this is our axis and so this will be set to local, because then now it's this is Z, this is Y, this is X, whereas opposed the view, which is traditionally how it would be, is set not how we like it. I guess that's the best way I can try to explain it. Click on the Y-axis, and we're going to duplicate this now by pressing Control and C. Make sure you're clicking on the Y-axis when you do this. Then click, Control C. Click on the Y-axis, Control C. Click, Control C. Control C. And now we have some barracks. Obviously, they look very similar, and it doesn't look good this way at all. In fact, this is a very terrible scene we're setting up. That's okay. That's not a big deal. Let's now add a little bit of decals, just a few. So what we're going to do is go to Mix and click Decal. Make sure you have the Follow Terrain and Snap to Objects on. And let's add one right here, over by our electrical station. You can add decals to break up just the world. It's very good for breaking up the world and adding some life to it, so it doesn't look totally bland. Go to Decals under Materials. Let's see, what would we like to do? We could have a blood splat. We'll have a blood splat there. So just right click, assign a material to selected object. Control C, we can duplicate it and make it a concrete crack. If that grid gets annoying, you can turn it off. So now we have a concrete crack. Apply something over here. We'll have some dirt, as we can. I mean, obviously having 3 decals looks odd, but generally, if you know what you're doing, this won't be an issue. Let's add a little bit of graffiti. This is where we're going to learn a little bit about using decals. So let's go back to Mix, add a decal with this selected. You should be able to make stuff on this wall right here. Rotate it until it's flush. Excuse me. And then you pull it out a little bit. And we're going to change this projection type to project on static objects. There's terrain, static objects, and just on terrain. It's very helpful. So let's say I want to have out static objects. It doesn't actually have to be floating off the surface. For example, these ones do. If you look, I can raise this one off. It's floating. But if I were to project this, it is no longer floating. And its opacity is determined by how close to the surface this is. That's always a very good thing, but if you have, let's say you have multiple static objects, it cannot be a good thing sometimes, and it can look awkward. It just depends on what you're doing and what the situation is that you want. So we're going to make this graffiti. Looks good. You know, there's a lot of different graffitis. We can Control C this. Whoops. I just moved both of them. If you turn it off from projection and change it to planner, it really doesn't make a difference. It just matters, you know, how you want it to look, I guess. A lot of these graffitis don't have very high opacities and you have to change them up. So just decorate your scene how you want it. If you want, you can take time. It really doesn't matter. It's up to you. Just, sorry, I didn't actually have this on the right monitor. But yeah, I changed my opacity and my diffuse color to get that look. So now that we've got some decals laid out, let's see what else we can add to our scene. Let's get some props. We'll do is that an old gas pump? And then this will be like a little area where they keep their Humvees, I guess. Let's see what we like. Let's add some steel beams. They may look a little bit awkward, but it's okay. So we're gonna rotate these so they're at a 90-degree angle. close as possible. And this will be like the parking area, I guess. Whoops. I'm just going to rotate this. Really doesn't matter how it looks, so we'll just quickly place this. We're going to call that good, and then we're going to quickly place 3 Humvees. And we're going to learn about setting up physics states. So go back to Entity, Vehicles, HM, lots of letters, drag that out, and set it to over here, place, rotate, copy. Now obviously these two are in the exact same positions, just off a little bit, so you want to offset them a little bit so it doesn't look super obvious that this is totally fake. I mean, you always want to try to add some variation to give the feeling of immersion and realism. And then next we're going to learn about physics states. So we're going to create a third Jeep. We're going to place it right here. They don't like parking over there. They're rebellious. You can see obviously that if we were to go into the editor right now, let's quickly save our level. We go into the editor. That's not what we wanted to do at all. But chances are once we turn on physics and use the physics state, it's not going to work well. So let's actually move this a little bit. We don't want this thing to just spawn and fall over. So right there is a good spot. Place it above your terrain. Rotate it. That way when we apply physics, it won't be a big deal. So what we're going to do is if you click your objects down here, you can scroll down. You can see this physical state. You can click clear state or save state. So what we're going to do is click physics and AI down here, or alternately under, right here. Enable physics and AI. What we're going to do down here, because it's a lot easier, just click it. And you see our, you know what, I like that there. I don't even care. So we're going to leave that like that because that's really cool. But right here you can see how it actually is leaning on the ground, how it should be. So what we're going to do is now go up, we're going to scroll down to save state. And now, that's exactly how it should be. We'll talk about the TOD in a little bit, or time of day. So let's get rid of that right now. So go to terrain, time of day. It should open a little dialog box. Mine has been a pain recently, and it wants to make itself super small. And I'm gonna click and drag and add this to my little collection of tools here. So what we're gonna do is you can see the time of day obviously affects the weather and how all this is. If you're even somewhat familiar with Cryengine, you should know this by now. And you know, you can change stuff like, depending on what time it is, we can change the time of day. Well, let's set it to about 6 o'clock or 1800 hours. Yeah. And then we're going to change our sun color. You know, we can turn it to yellow. You can see how it's actually affecting the things around it, this sun color multiplier. Sun specular. I personally like to turn it down a little bit so I don't have these white looking trees. It just looks absurd. Turn it down to a pretty low value. Looks, while it may not be 100% realistic, it looks much nicer on the eyes and prettier. You see just how bright and white that is. That's basically, you know, you go through all of these. If you have record on, you just kind of start where you want to start, and you start adjusting your time of day how you like it, and you can start building one. It can take a while to get a good one. I mean, if you just want to set it up for one specific time of day, that doesn't take that long. It just depends on what you're looking for. There's also some other options over here like contrast, color balance. If you're even familiar with photography, you probably have a leg up on anybody else who is not, because there's a lot of terminology and things like that that are used in photography that are used here. We're gonna save that state. Maybe I won't do that thing again. But we're gonna actually load from a file. So I've already prepared one for you, and it will actually be called something else. It'll be within your project files for this lesson. So just double click and open that. You can see it's actually pretty bland right now. Nothing exciting going on. So we're gonna turn it to 6 o'clock, which is right about there. There's definitely something weird going on over here. Let's just delete this. That object is messed up. This time of day doesn't look that great on this level. This is designed for a specific level, so let's just set our time of day for about 1500 hours. No. There we go. It's a little bit drastic, but it'll do. It'll allow us to see some of the lights and stuff that we do. So what we're going to do is we are going to replace that very disobedient electrical house we had. So we're going to go back to structures, buildings, and we're going to add a gatehouse. That's much better. And rotate it by pressing 2, sorry, and then 1 is move. And now we got our little gatehouse, and it's all merry and happy, not floating into the sky, which is just how we'd like it. Next, we're going to add a few lights to make this just a little bit more realistic. While this is a very barren and not really designed to be an explored part of the forest level, we're going to go over here to Entity, and we're going to click Lights. Use a standard light, drag it out into the scene. Remember to have this on so that way it'll spawn at the bottom of the floor, pull it up into the middle. We can change our radius, all sorts of other things. We want to try to keep it within this room, so a value of about 7 or 8 will work. Let's turn the diffuse. Let's make it a little bit warmer of a light. Let's just make it cold. And then turn up that HDR. Turn up the diffuse. Actually, I'm going to go with warm. Well, it's kind of absurd. It looks a little bit nicer. And then we're going to turn on the shadows. You may have some shadow artifacting oftentimes, but under options, go to cast shadows. Very high spec. And it just looks a little bit more natural. You can see the shadows from these bars, now on the Jeep. And, while having a lot of shadows can definitely reduce performance, it also makes it look nicer. But you're going to get some issues like all of these little lines. And those can be dealt with using adjusting your shadow bias, shadow slope bias, and a few other things. There are other ways to turn it up and remove that, but you just kind of have to be careful with what you do. If you're not careful, you could end up there's one other way to fix this type of issue, and it's to increase the maximum shadow resolution to an 8K texture. But if you have more than one light, depending on your system, it will just kill your frames per second greatly. So I highly recommend not doing that. But if it's just for a simple scene like my indoor scene, which I will probably shown another tutorial. I have a pretty powerful system, so that wasn't an issue for me. But if it's a larger scale scene, definitely try to avoid it. Just gonna add another light. Make sure your light's selected. I'm just gonna do the same thing. I mean, obviously a light would never be this bright. Well, it would be, but just not like this. Plus there's no light source, but it looks good from a distance. Now we can add some more objects. Fences. We're gonna add a railing. It's not gonna look great, but we'll drag this out. Make sure you have it set to place here. It'll kind of be like a border. Make sure you have it flush. And then now we can use the grid. Make sure you have it placed on a grid. And this is how modular building comes into play. See, now we can seamlessly mix together these two parts. Just like that. And then we can keep doing that. And if you'd like, you could go all the way around, just rotating and copying. There's some other things in here used for making modular stuff, or modular fences that come inside your SDK. Let's delete that last one. Last thing we're going to do for this base is we are going to add just a few more entities and an AI. So go over here under entities, click AI. We're going to add a grunt. Whoops, that's a dragon. That's not what we want. We want grunt. You can see he's just standing there, minding his own business. He's probably selling drugs too. But that's okay. We're not here to judge him. We're here to learn from him. So if you press Control G, you can actually interact with the AI, given the level doesn't crash. Had a lot of issues with crashing levels, so probably any of this work that I just did will be lost. Yep. But it'll let me save the level, and it can be difficult to select it, but I've often saved it and never had a problem. It can just take a while to figure out where you're clicking. Using tab is a good way to do it. And then I'll close your level, and then I'll pause this and come back with. So now I got my level back up. You can probably interact with the AI. I've had a lot of issues with this version of the editor with quite a few separate things. One of them is interacting with AI, and I mean this is a fresh install of the editor as well. I had some material editor glitches. I believe in DirectX 10 you can't use, 11 you can't use cloud volumes. I also have had a few other issues with physics where it crashes my system. And I don't think it's specifically my system related. So what we're going to do is, now that we have two AI placed, let's take a look and see what else. Let's add some birds. I mean, birds are everywhere, right? So let's add some birds from the voids in the entity section. Click, put them up in the sky. Simple as that. Now you can see we have some birds. Let's adjust the count to 100. That's a lot of birds. You can say change the size to 2. They're big birds. 0.5. Their size is they have a size variation now. They can flock. Let's do attract max distance 500. Movement. Let's see. Options. Radius 500. Now they'll be spread throughout this island. They'll just kind of float and do whatever they want. But definitely adds to the realism of the world. let's go to back up here to our entities. If we wanted, we can make a little chicken coop. It's up to you. There's chickens, fish, lots and lots of settings. Doors. It's just good to get a hang of these types of things and trying to just mess around and experiment. That's really how you're going to find that you learn stuff. Let's place a few weapons over here. We're going to go back to our geometric entities and then objects, props. Let's go to mix, sawmill. This might not be what we wanted. Yeah, that's not what I was looking for. Go to maritime. We need some crates. We'll just do basic box. That looks good. We're going to place a weapon on this. So entities, and then items, scar. Place that there. Whoops, press 2. Rotate it. And now you have a weapon. You can go into your editor and pick that up as well. It's always good to save your levels as you go. No, it's never fun to lose data. And then we can see that this actually is a window, and we want the light to come out of that a little bit. So if you wanted, you could add a light. I'd like to quickly talk about immersion for a little bit. A lot of immersion comes from just seeing, thinking about how would this look in real life, and how can I make it look good? And what can I do to make my scene look more realistic? It's kind of like if you're modeling something, you use reference images. Well, if you're applying a material, you use reference images. If you're lighting a scene, you use reference images. And it allows you to create much more realistic scenarios, and just it gives you an overall better experience, and it allows people to connect with your level even more. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Just break it up, adding these kinds of things, while they may be small, can be the difference between making and breaking a level, and making and breaking a player's experience, and making them want to actually be a part of the world, and finding enjoyment in it. So now we got that set up. We're just not gonna do it over there. We don't want to take the time, but you understand. Let's see, what else could we do? We're going to place an ambient sound. We're going to make just a world sound. It's not going to be anything special. We're not going to have, we could place a beach over there, or beach noises, but we're just going to set up a bass sound, because this is our bass. So we're going to go under sounds. We're going to do ambient volume. Make sure you have this selected. Just put it in the middle of the bass to make life easy. Rename it. We're going to call it bass 1 sounds. It's also a good practice to name things when you place them, because let's say you wanted to go to select objects. Well, you don't know which is what based on its number. I mean, geometric entity 20 is this fence. 15 is that little house over there. So it's good to name things so that way you can quickly and effectively edit things and select objects. Excuse me. So we're going to go up here to area, add a shape. With this selected, we're going to select around the base of this mountain, and now everything that is within this mountain is going to carry that ambient volume, and you'll see why in a little bit. So remember, this is under area, under the objects tab in the roll-up bar. Double click to end that, and then under here, under height, we're going to raise this to 500. That way it'll go all the way up, and you can see if you click closed, you can actually see the volume, and now we're within it. So with your shape that you just drew selected, what we're going to do is we're going to associate it with this ambient volume that we just made, or the bass sounds one. So click pick with this selected, click pick, and then select bass sounds 1. Now click bass sounds 1, and you now have these both tied together, and you can actually see it by this little link that they are working together now as one. So now we're just going to have to assign a sound, which is name, sound environments, jungle, jungle camp ambience. You can click play and hear it. Click OK. And you can hear it now. I'm going to turn it down though. So now when you play your level, you have some sound. And the same kind of thing goes for, anywhere else in the level. For example, if there was a shore, you could make it look like that. Or you can make it sound like there was a shore. You can play sounds the same exact ways. There's lots and lots of things you can do with it. Let's see, what else should we do? What would really be helpful? I think the final finishing touch that I'd like to add to this scene is add some clouds. Clouds, this is nice and everything, but clouds really just bring the world together and make it feel a lot less generic because no cloud is the same. It just looks nice. We obviously can't use the cloud volumes right now in this build, so we're going to use this distance cloud under mix. Just place it really anywhere. It's always good to try to pull it really high up there. That way it won't look like it's that close to the player. And then you're going to want to go to your material editor. Materials, clouds, distance cloud, right click, assign. You can't see it because we need to scale it up, so press 3 on your keyboard and just start scaling it. And then we're going to copy that and then assign distance cloud 2. Copy this one this way. Distance cloud. And now we've got ourselves a cloudy island. Again, you could probably put them up a little bit higher, but it definitely adds to the realism of the world, and it looks pretty nice. It's a nice sunset, even though the sky is green, but it's beautiful. It's a beautiful green sunset. But yeah, I never actually finished this time of day. It'll probably look a little bit nicer when I actually give it to you, but that's alright. It's a tutorial. All that matters is that you're learning. So, in this tutorial, we've covered quite a few things. We've learned how to create terrain, we've learned how to texture and paint terrain, we've learned how to generate our surface textures, make roads, add vegetation, use the terrain editor, place objects, work with entities, sounds, shapes. We've learned how to work with vehicles. We've placed some basic AI. You can interact with them. I'm afraid to, because I don't want to crash my editor. Place some clouds, and we've learned a little bit about setting up your time of day, and that should be a good basis for making levels. In a future tutorial, we're going to talk about using viz areas and how we can use them to set up an indoor scene and why they're useful. Since I just showed you that, you might want to play around with the viz area. It's quite a powerful tool for making indoor stuff. Until the next one, I hope that you like this tutorial, and it would be nice if you liked, favorited, and subscribed DCC tutorials, and suggested new tutorials that you'd like us to publish. We're constantly on the lookout for things that people really need, and we're hoping to be expanding to scripting. We will be doing After Effects, Photoshop, and quite a few other things, including some basic fume effects things that we're going to composite into After Effects. But mostly right now, we just want to focus on teaching the basics. And if there's any program or software or any really area of anything you'd like to learn, just send us a a message on YouTube and we'll get back to you. And we will most likely be able to do a tutorial for you. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.